Hey, how's it going everybody? Welcome back to Aussie Fish Keeping. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 7 of the best nano fish that you can get for your aquarium. So obviously all 7 of these species are very small fish and they make the perfect addition to any nano setup. So pretty much most of the fish on this list could comfortably fit in a 20-litre aquarium, which is like the ones I have here behind me. As long as you are fulfilling the specific needs of each of these species, you should find that they thrive in any sort of small size setup. But without any further ado, let's just jump straight into today's video with the first fish on our list. So as for the first fish on our list today, we have a super cool looking species. We have the celestial pearl Dano. So this fish is obviously a super popular nano fish. It is a little bit harder to come by here in Australia, although it is definitely around. So this fish obviously does have beautiful orange fins and really nice white speckling along its body, and it is actually a super sought after fish. So these guys are actually relatively easy to care for as long as you are providing them with the correct water parameters and diet and all sorts of things like that. So as for the water parameters for these guys, you're going to want to keep them with a temperature of around 22 to 26 degrees Celsius. And that's obviously around 73 to 79 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as for the pH, anything from around 6.5 to 7.5 should be good for these guys. So if you are planning on setting up a tank for these guys, it's always good to remember that you do want to try and keep them in a planted aquarium. So not only will this make them feel a lot more safe just because they have a lot of plants to hide in, but it's also going to make their colors pop a lot more, and you may actually see some breeding behavior going on if you have really bushy plants like Java moss and things like that. So another thing you do want to keep in mind if you do plan on getting these guys is trying to keep them in a low flow aquarium. So anything like a sponge filter should be good just to filter their tank. They don't really need any high filtration or high flow, and a lot of the time the high flow can stress them out a lot just because they are relatively weak swimmers. So if you can keep it to a minimal flow, that's obviously best. And then as for tank mates for these guys, obviously they are a very popular nano community fish, so you can keep them with other community fish, just anything that's relatively peaceful. So anything like Denios, Tetras, Coridors, catfish, bristlenose, and you may even be able to get away with keeping them with larger species of shrimp. So as for their diet, this is something that you're going to want to focus on a lot if you do want to have really nice popping colors on your fish. So I would generally recommend feeding them things like baby brine shrimp, frozen foods, and a high quality insect-based dry food. So you can also mix up their diet a little bit and feed these guys things like live mosquito larvae if you can get your hands on some every now and then. But yeah, as for the staples, I would just recommend the baby brine shrimp and the frozen foods and dry foods and things like that. But with that being said, the celestial pearl Dano is definitely a great nano fish, and I would highly recommend it for your aquarium. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have something that's not actually a fish, and I like to talk about them a lot. We have cherry shrimp. Cherry shrimp are one of my favorite little aquarium fish that you can get in the hobby. They're super colorful, they're super cool and interesting. But not only that, they are so peaceful and they're never gonna try and fight or attack any of your other fish. So they just are a really awesome addition for your nano aquarium. So a lot of people do stress out when it comes to the water parameters for these guys, but it really isn't that big of a deal. They are quite hardy. So as for the temperature, I keep mine unheated, but if you want to do heated, anything from around 22 to 27 degrees Celsius would be okay for these guys, and that's obviously around 71 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as for the pH, anywhere from around 7 to 7.5, these guys should thrive in. So because they are quite a small species, it is important that if you are planning on keeping them in a community aquarium, you do keep them with other really peaceful fish. So all sorts of small Rasboras and Tetras are obviously great tank mates, but you can also use things like bristlenose or other shrimp. But pretty much anything that's not too aggressive and doesn't have that big of a mouth should go okay with these guys. So as for the optimal tank setting for these guys, they do love a planted aquarium or at least some plant life in their tank. So the reason for this is because obviously they are very small and they can be preyed upon quite easily, so they can get stressed out in a larger sized aquarium. So as long as you do have some plants in there for them to go away and hide in when they are feeling stressed, So another great thing to keep these guys with is a sponge filter, and the reason for this is because they'll actually sit on the sponge filter throughout the day and graze off all the different biofilms and debris that the sponge filter has picked up from your aquarium. And the final thing you do need to remember is obviously keeping these guys with some source of calcium, so you can use things like dried up coral or cuttlebone. I generally try and use dried up coral just because it's a lot easier to find on the beach. So the reason for that is because these guys obviously do molt every now and then, and the calcium in the water does help them gain a really nice strong exoskeleton, which is obviously what you want if you do want really healthy shrimp. So as for diet for these guys, you can get all sorts of sinking shrimp pellets or dry food, things like that, that is specifically made for shrimp. But on top of that, they will go around and eat all sorts of biofilms that grow in your aquarium, and they will also eat small amounts of algae here and there. But with that being said, I definitely think that the cherry shrimp is another great addition to any Nano aquarium. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have a super cool little fish. We have the Pygmy Coridor. So these guys are again a really peaceful little fish, and they are just a great addition into any Nano tank. So as for water parameters for these guys, they do like a heated aquarium, and anything from around 22 to 26 degrees Celsius is best, which is obviously around 72 to 79 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as for pH, anything from around 6.5 to 7 is optimal for these guys. So as for tank mates for these guys, they are very peaceful themselves, and they won't nip or pick at any fish in your aquarium. So you do need to keep them with fish that aren't going to do that back to them. So things like Danos, tetras, rasboras, other corridors, or cherry shrimp would go great. So because these guys are a very small fish, they do like somewhere to hide. So if you can provide them with all sorts of nooks and crannies throughout your aquarium, they will really appreciate that. And on top of that, if you can provide all sorts of live plants in there, that's obviously going to be best for them as well. So these guys do like a pretty varied diet, and there is a couple of things that you probably already have in your aquarium that you can feed them. So not only will these guys eat things like frozen foods and dry foods, but they also really love live black worms. And if you can find a few snails throughout your aquarium, you can actually crush those up, and those will sink down to the bottom, and those also make a great snack for these guys. But with that being said, I definitely think the Pygmy Coridor is another great Nano fish, and I would highly recommend them. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have a super unique little fish. We have the Coly Loach. These guys are a really weird looking fish, and they definitely make a great, unique, and fun addition to any sort of Nano aquarium. So as for water parameters for these guys, you can keep them in anything from around 24 to 30 degrees Celsius, and that's obviously around 75 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as for water parameters, just a general 6.5 to 7.5 will do for these guys. So the thing with these guys is they don't actually come out a lot during the day, and it's actually quite rare to see them. They actually are quite skittish and shy, and they don't usually come out until they have gained a little bit of size. Although if you do come out at nighttime with your lights off, you will find these guys swimming all throughout your tank, and they are a super quirky little fish to watch. As for tank mates for these guys, they are very peaceful themselves, so if you can keep them with other peaceful fish, obviously like Danos, tetras, rasboras, and all sorts of small-mouthed fish like that, those are going to be some great tank mates for them. And then as for the tank setting, these guys do really love a planted aquarium. Not too planted, otherwise you will just never see these guys. And another great thing to add is all sorts of hiding spaces as well. So because of that really slender, elongated shape, they do like to get into all sorts of crevices and nooks and crannies and things like that, just because they do feel a lot safer in those tighter spaces. And as for their diet, any sorts of frozen foods and live black worms and other sinking dry foods is the best diet. But with that being said, the Coly Loach is definitely another super cool fish that you can get for your Nano aquarium. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have a super beautiful Australian native. We have the Blueeye. So in a lot of countries besides Australia, I think they actually call them the Blueeye rainbow fish. But here in Australia, we have blue eyes and rainbow fish. So blue eyes are just a really small little Australian native fish. So blue eyes are a really beautiful little addition into any aquarium, whether it be a nano tank or just a regular sized tank. So as for water parameters for these guys, anything from around 22 to 28 degrees Celsius, which is around 72 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as for the pH, anything from around 6 to 7 is generally best. So these guys can actually tolerate super low conditions, and they've been known to thrive in waters at around 15 degrees Celsius. As for tank setting for these guys, all sorts of plants is definitely a great addition, but you also want nice open water swimming space for them. So if you do have this open water swimming space and you have a few males and a few females in there, you will notice that the males actually show off to the females, and you will get all sorts of really cool behaviors coming out of them. And then as for the diet for these guys, anything from live baby brine shrimp, frozen food, flake food, dry food, anything like that is good. They aren't too fussy at all, as long as you are providing them with a high protein, nutrient rich diet to keep them going. But with that being said, the Blueeye or the Blueeye rainbow fish is another great little nano fish that you can get for your aquarium. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have a really tiny fish, and they're super cool, super colorful. We have the Killy Rasbora. So this fish, like I said before, is absolutely tiny, and you definitely want to be keeping these guys in a nano tank, otherwise they're just going to stress out too much, or you're just going to lose them altogether. So because of their size, these guys can be a little bit fickle when it comes to water parameters, and they can get stressed out quite easily if there is large fluctuations. So you do want to keep it at around 22 to 28 degrees Celsius, which is around 72 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. And you want a pH of around 6 to 7. So as for tank mates for these guys, you don't want anything with a large mouth at all, and you don't really want any semi-aggressive fish, just anything that minds their own business, like cherry shrimp or Pygmy Coridors. Anything that just stays out of the way and isn't gonna like nip at your fish and stress them out at all is best. So as for the perfect tank setting, you need to 100% make sure you have a sponge filter in there. And the reason for this is there's actually two reasons. So number one is because a lot of the times if you have a hang-on filter or some sort of internal filter, you may actually find that because these guys are very small, they can actually get sucked up the inlet of your filter, and that's obviously not good whatsoever. So having a sponge filter completely terminates that risk. It just means your fish are a lot safer swimming around. As well as that, the sponge filter is going to create a little microbiome for all sorts of microorganisms and biofilms to grow on, and that's going to supply the fish with all sorts of really good nutrient-rich, high-protein food. And another thing you want to make sure is that you have a lot of plants in this tank. So obviously they do love all sorts of nooks and crannies to hide in as well, and if you have really bushy plants, you should find that your fish feel a lot more safe, and they will actually be a lot more colorful because of that. So as for diet for these guys, just because you keep them with a sponge filter doesn't mean you can't feed them. So you do need to feed them things like live baby brine shrimp or really small cut up frozen foods. And you can even break down dry foods really tiny as well. Anything like that is good for them, as long as it is small enough to fit in their little mouths. But with that being said, the Killy Rasbora is definitely another great nano fish, and I would highly recommend them for your aquarium. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have one of the most colorful fish that you can get in the aquarium hobby. So killifish come in a variety of different shapes and sizes, and they make the perfect nano fish. So there is a few species out there that do get a lot larger, but there's also a majority of species that are very small and you can keep in small size tanks. So one of which is the clown killifish, which is a super popular fish in the aquarium hobby, especially amongst nano aquarium keepers. I believe they're also called the rocket killifish, I think, or something like that, just because of that tail. It does look like they're like blasting into outer space or something. So as for water parameters for these guys, anything from around 20 to 26 degrees Celsius, which is around 68 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. And then as for the pH, you're going to want to keep it at 6 to 7, and that's just going to keep them really healthy in your aquarium. So as for tank mates, you do want to keep them with other peaceful fish, just because these guys are very colorful and they do sometimes have long flowing fins. So because of this, they are going to be more attractive to other fish to nip at. So you don't want to keep them with things like Danios, just because Danios can be like prone to nipping. But you can definitely get away with keeping them with larger cherry shrimp. So if you have like some adult sized cherry shrimp, those would be great tank mates for them. And you can get away with keeping them with things like bristlenose, Coridors, catfish, tetras, rasboras, all sorts of peaceful fish like that. So as for their diet, you're going to want to feed them all sorts of live and frozen foods, as well as really high quality dry foods. So as long as you can provide them with all of their specific needs, I definitely think that the killifish are another great nano fish that you can get for your aquarium. But with that being said, that is going to bring us to the end of today's video. So I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope I helped you guys find a brand new nano fish for your aquarium. If you did enjoy today's video and you haven't done so already, please make sure to go down and subscribe. And while you're down there, comment your thoughts on today's video. I always go down there and I reply back to every comment I see. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in that next video.